Welcome to the Palace of Versailles in the 1780s. Imagine a world dripping with gold, silk, and diamonds. This was the home of King Louis XVI and his queen, Marie Antoinette. Life here wasn't just about politics. It was about performance. Every bow, every whisper, and every new gown was part of a grand play. Your reputation was everything. One misplaced word or a rumor spread in the gilded hallways could ruin you forever. The air was thick with ambition and gossip, a perfect breeding ground for a scandal that would shake the very foundations of France. It was a place where appearances were more important than the truth, a fact that would soon have devastating consequences. The court was a glittering trap, a gilded cage where hundreds of nobles vied for the king and queen's favor. They spent fortunes they didn't have on clothes and parties, all to stay relevant. Marie Antoinette was at the center of this whirlwind. As a young queen from Austria, she was already viewed with suspicion by many French courtiers. She loved fashion, lavish parties, and creating her own private world away from the stiff rules of the court. This desire for privacy, however, made her seem aloof and out of touch. People who felt excluded from her inner circle were quick to believe the worst about her, whispering tales of extravagance and moral decay that were often wildly exaggerated. In this high-stakes environment, being close to the queen was the ultimate prize. It meant power, influence, and access to the royal purse. People would do almost anything to gain her attention. This desperation created opportunities for clever and unscrupulous individuals to exploit the system. They understood that in a world built on perception, you could create your own reality. If you could convince someone you had the queen's ear, you could convince them to do anything. And one woman, a down-on-her-luck aristocrat with a talent for manipulation, was about to play this game better than anyone else. She saw the court's obsession with status as a golden ticket. The stage was perfectly set for disaster. You had a queen who was already unpopular and misunderstood by the public. You had a court full of ambitious nobles, desperate for a sign of royal favor. And you had a society teetering on the edge of bankruptcy, where the ordinary people of France were growing increasingly angry at the perceived wastefulness of the monarchy. All it would take was a single spark to ignite this powder keg. That spark would come in the form of a diamond necklace so magnificent, so outrageously expensive, that its story would become a legend of greed, deceit, and royal ruin. At the heart of this tangled web was a woman named Jeanne de la Motte. She was a descendant of an illegitimate son of a French king, but her family had fallen on hard times. Jeanne was clever, charming, and deeply ambitious. She craved the wealth and status she felt was her birthright. She managed to secure a small pension from the crown but wanted much more. Jeanne masterfully created a new identity for herself at court, pretending to be a close confidant of Queen Marie Antoinette. She knew that people would believe her because they desperately wanted to. She was the ultimate con artist, playing on the desires and insecurities of those around her. Her primary target was Cardinal de Rohan. He was a man from one of France's most powerful noble families, but he had a big problem. Queen Marie Antoinette despised him. She remembered him from his time as an ambassador in her native Austria, where his scandalous behavior had offended her mother, the Empress. Rohan was desperate to win back the queen's favor and secure a powerful position as a chief minister. He was so blinded by this ambition that he was willing to believe anything or anyone who promised him a way back into her good graces. This made him the perfect pawn for Jeanne de la Motte's elaborate scheme. And then, of course, there was the queen herself, Marie Antoinette. In this story, she is famous for what she didn't do. By the 1780s, she had tried to move away from her earlier reputation for extravagance. She was a mother now and preferred a simpler life at her private retreat, the Petit Trianon. She had no knowledge of the plot being hatched in her name. In fact, she had already rejected the very necklace at the center of the scandal years before, telling the royal jewelers that the kingdom needed more ships, not more diamonds. But her past reputation for lavish spending made it easy for the public to believe she was involved. These three figures formed a triangle of deception. You had Jeanne, the mastermind, driven by a hunger for wealth and status. You had Cardinal de Rohan, the gullible and ambitious dupe willing to do anything to regain royal favor. And you had Marie Antoinette, the innocent but unpopular queen whose name and reputation were the most valuable tools in the entire con. Jeanne skillfully played them against each other, using the cardinal's ambition and the queen's reputation to orchestrate a fraud so audacious it would become the talk of Europe and tarnish the French monarchy forever. The story truly begins with the necklace itself. It was a masterpiece of jewelry, commissioned by the previous king, Louis XV, for his mistress, Madame du Barry. But the king died before it was finished. The Parisian jewelers Glimmer and Bassange were left with an impossibly expensive piece on their hands. It contained 647 flawless diamonds, weighing an astonishing 2,800 carats. They tried to sell it to the new queen, Marie Antoinette, but she wisely refused. The price was astronomical, 1.6 million livres, a fortune at the time. The jewelers were desperate, and this desperation made them vulnerable to a well-told lie. This is where Jeanne de la Motte saw her chance. She convinced the lovelorn Cardinal de Rohan that she was secretly negotiating on behalf of the queen. She told him Marie Antoinette desperately wanted the necklace but couldn't buy it publicly because of the country's financial troubles. According to Jeanne, the queen wanted Rohan to act as a secret go-between. To make her story believable, Jeanne began faking letters from the queen to the cardinal. These letters, forged by her accomplice, were filled with warm and encouraging words, making Rohan believe he was finally winning the queen's friendship. He was completely taken in by the ruse. The deception reached its peak with a dramatic nighttime meeting in the gardens of Versailles. To seal the deal, Jeanne arranged for the cardinal to have a brief, face-to-face encounter with the queen. She hired a Parisian prostitute who bore a slight resemblance to Marie Antoinette, dressed her in a white gown, and had her meet Rohan in a dark grove. In the shadows, the impostor handed the cardinal a rose and whispered a few words of forgiveness. Rohan was utterly convinced. He now believed he had the queen's personal approval and trust. He felt he was on the verge of realizing all his political ambitions. With the cardinal completely hooked, the final part of the scam fell into place. He signed the contract with the jewelers, promising to pay for the necklace in installments on behalf of the queen. As soon as he handed the diamond necklace over to Jeanne de la Motte, supposedly to be delivered to the queen, the plot was complete. Of course, it never reached Marie Antoinette. Jeanne's husband immediately took the necklace apart, and the magnificent diamonds were sold off one by one in the black markets of Paris and London. The con artists had their money, the jewelers had a worthless contract, and the cardinal had a false sense of triumph. The whole scheme collapsed when the first payment for the necklace came due, and the jewelers, not having heard from anyone, went directly to the queen. Imagine her shock and confusion. She had no idea what they were talking about. When the truth finally came out, King Louis XVI was furious. He had Cardinal de Rohan arrested publicly in the middle of court, and a massive trial was held. This was a huge mistake. Instead of a private investigation, the affair became a public spectacle. The trial put the queen's lifestyle and reputation on full display for the entire nation to judge, and they judged her harshly. During the trial, Jeanne de la Motte's lies and the cardinal's foolishness were exposed, yet incredibly, the court found Cardinal de Rohan not guilty of fraud. The judges and the public saw him as a victim, a poor, innocent man who had been duped. Jeanne de la Motte was found guilty and punished, but she later escaped from prison and published her memoirs, filled with scandalous lies about the queen. The public, already suspicious of Marie Antoinette, chose to believe the con artist. They saw the queen's acquittal not as proof of her innocence, but as a sign that the monarchy was covering up its own corruption. Even though Marie Antoinette was completely innocent, the affair of the diamond necklace destroyed what was left of her reputation. To the common people of France, who were struggling to afford bread, the story of a queen scheming to buy a multi-million livre necklace was the ultimate symbol of a monarchy that was greedy, decadent, and completely disconnected from their suffering. This scandal confirmed their worst fears. It didn't matter that it wasn't true. The story was just too good. And it fit perfectly with the narrative of a foreign-born queen who was bankrupting their country for her own selfish pleasures. This event became a crucial stepping stone towards the French Revolution, which would erupt just a few years later. The trial had exposed the monarchy to public ridicule and stripped away its sacred authority. It showed the people that the nobles and even the royals could be made to look foolish and corrupt. Trust in the institution of the monarchy plummeted. The affair solidified Marie Antoinette's image as Madame Deceit, the woman who was spending France into ruin. When the revolution began, this story was used as powerful propaganda, fanning the flames of anger and resentment that would ultimately bring the entire system crashing down.